I'm on today, to have Max with us. He basically co-founded Agrilution and is currently the CEO. Agrilution's mission is to bring fresh greens into your kitchen. And with their latest farming technology, they can actually allow you to grow your own herbs and salads at home, which is quite amazing if you think about it. But Max, for the ones who don't know what Agrilution is all about, can you just give us a brief introduction about the company and your journey co-founding the business?
Sure, I'd love to. First of all, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here, and I'm also looking forward to some questions later on. So just to paint the picture a bit, I'd love to go back and tell the story of how it all started. So I'm 30 years old, or 31 years old. I'm from Munich, Germany, and that's also where I'm talking to you guys from at the moment. I'm streaming from our office here in the west of Munich. And, my story began a relatively long time ago. And I was born here in Munich, and we moved to China with the family when I was 9 years old because my mom was doing rural development work there. So we lived in the northwest of China in Xi'an, in a small city of 8 million people. But there were hardly any foreigners there. So it was a very interesting experience. And my mom was doing rural development work there. And I sort of grew up in like a golden cage. And then on the weekends, however, our parents always took us to the countryside to show us the projects that they were working on. So at a very young age, I was confronted with people that really didn't have any access to the bare necessities of life. So no access to fresh water, no access to food, not even proper shelter. And that seeing that huge difference between where you're born, essentially, left a big impact or a big imprint on me. And so we then moved back to Germany at some point. I finished school here. And after school, I was always looking for something to do with a purpose, something to find a way to give back to society or to the environment in some way. But I didn't really know where to start. So I started traveling a lot. I spent some time lived in Spain for a while, then moved to New Zealand to work for Greenpeace. And during my time in New Zealand, I came across a book by Dr. Dixon de Pommier, The Vertical Farm. And that book really changed my life 180 degrees. I was so fascinated by that concept of being able to grow food in cities in a more sustainable way, with less impact on the environment. And doing that through a new sort of like a technological approach, that I was so fascinated while reading that book that I just sent him an email and asked him where in the world I could study something related to that topic. And to my surprise, he then really replied to me within a couple of hours, and I started talking to him. And then I actually moved to the Netherlands to study international food and agribusiness at a university there that had the biggest applied research facility for indoor farming already 9 years ago. And that university was called HAS. So it wasn't even Wageningen, the big university that probably everyone knows, but back then Wageningen wasn't even doing research on the topic. And I basically spent some time in a relatively small, boring countryside town there, and had a lot of time to nerd out and dive deeper into the topic of vertical farming. And then sort of started realizing that there were a lot of projects going on around the world already in terms of either research institutes or universities looking into the topic, or even first companies. But most of them were focusing either purely on research or on industrial scale applications. And I just saw this huge opportunity in bringing really all of the benefits that vertical farming has to offer, and trying to bring them as close as possible to the point of consumption, so to the consumer, into their home. And from that idea, that's really how Agrilution was started and was born. And then the first thing we started developing was a product that's now also on the market since last year, which we call the Plant Cube. It's sort of like a home appliance, like a dishwasher-sized unit with 2 layers and all the tech that's usually only applied in industrial scale vertical farms. So we have full climate control, automated watering, full spectrum LEDs, and the machine takes care of the entire growing process. So we've also developed a thing that we call a seed mat. It's, in essence, it's a substrate with pre-integrated seeds already, and we ship that dry to the doors of our customers, and they then put it into the machine, and the rest of the process is plug and play. So you only need internet and electricity, and then the machine takes care of the entire growing process from seed to harvest. In the end, you get a push notification to your app. We give you recipe suggestions of what to cook with it, and you can harvest continuously, almost on a daily basis. And yeah, that's really what we've been working on the past 7 years now.
Oh wow, that's a 7-year journey in 8 minutes. Thanks, Max, for that. Just to maybe deep dive a little bit on the product again, just to bring everyone up to speed with what the solution does. Can you actually maybe tell us a little bit more about how did the product came about, and how did you guys, I guess, through a number of iterations, brought it to life, as in the form that we all know today?
Well, it really started, I was talking about this concept of vertical farming with a lot of friends and people I knew and family, and everyone always thought I was fucking crazy, who wants to grow food at home, and how is that even possible in a machine? And they didn't know what I was talking about, so I needed someone to visualize what I was talking about, and that's how actually I got introduced to my co-founder again. So I've known him for almost 20 years because we used to play basketball when we were kids together in school. And then roughly 8 years ago, when I started talking about this concept, I also came across him again, and he was really good at 3D and visualization software. And he then basically created the first render of what was in my head. And then he was so excited about the idea that we started working on it together. And then we started raising. Actually, we didn't even start raising, but someone offered us money to build the first prototype of what we were talking about. And then we started taking part in students' competitions and also Thought for Food. So Marie, who is on the call here, she works for TFF now. And TFF was really our launch pad, so to say, in 2013, when we became runner-up of that contest and got a lot of media attention. And then we also got first bigger amounts of investments from first angel investors in Germany. And then at some point we raised our first couple million euros, and I decided to drop out of university because I had found the project that I really wanted to dedicate my full attention and time to. And so I moved back to Munich and started working on building Agrilution full-time. And then we grew from, Philip and I, from 2 people in the beginning to roughly 30 people, or a bit over 30 who we were last year, up to the point of really like iterating product after product. We did about eight product iterations before we launched the first one to market last year. And then we were in a somewhat difficult financial situation end of last year, and then found an amazing partner in Miele, who took over, or he didn't take over, but they we made an asset deal with them, and now we're part of the Miele corporation. And we were always very skeptical about working with big corporates, but to be honest, it's really like a match made in heaven. It's so wonderful to work with them because we align on our values, and they let us work on our vision long term, and they think very long term because they're a family owned company. They're not stock market traded or anything. So yeah, there's just there are a lot of interesting synergies between Miele and us. So they have, well, we can leverage basically their sourcing capabilities, their engineering, and they have over 100 years experience in the home appliance sector. They're by far the biggest leading premium brand in the world when it comes to home appliances. And there are just a lot of interesting synergies where we can work together now, and it just opens up so many new possibilities that everyone decided to stay at the company, and are very excited about the future now.
That is awesome, Max, and it's a great actually segue into my next question. But before I get into that, I'm glad that you brought it up as a key topic. I guess we hear a lot about corporate social collaboration, and it's so reassuring to hear that you so far you had a really good experience, and you can really align, I guess your company's value with the Miele, Miele's ones, although there are a way bigger, I guess, organizations than yours, and in particular that they're working on I guess the same time horizon that you guys are working on as well in terms of long-term vision, which is awesome. So just to maybe deep dive a little bit on that. So you said you guys have done a deal now that they have taken over on an asset level, but still empowering you guys to actually run the business. Can you tell us maybe a bit more about your journey? First of engaging with them, where did that kind of content, came from, and then I guess your experience, working with them. And if you can share maybe any learnings that you've gathered along the way with any fellow founders that might have joined us today.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we were, I would say, a normal type of startup. We were venture capital backed the past 6 years. And we didn't have any of the big US-based VCs on board, but we had some big German funds and raised close to 10 million euros over the course of the years. And it's just a completely different ballgame now, working with someone that's family owned, where everything is long term, rather than raising money for 12 to 24 months, and then being in that rat race of trying to reach your milestones, and then selling a story that's super difficult to achieve, but you have to sell a good story to raise a ton of money and to keep running. And now, everything is slowed down. We can really work on the things that we want to work on, which is the long-term vision, and not some way of trying to cut corners here and there to make a ton of money, because that's not really why we started out. It's a purpose-driven company and not something to just make a ton of money. But what really happened over the course of the years, I mean, we've worked with corporates in the past because we had this relationship with Osram, for example. We had a strategic partnership with them, and they were also one of our investors. Okay. And we, for example, it all started because we were developing our own LED module for the product. And the technical cooperation went really well, and then they decided to also invest into the company. And then we had them on board as an investor for 2.5 years. And that also went well. But of course, I mean, everyone has, it's sometimes challenging to align all of the interests, I would say, or the different perspectives. And then, they're traded on the stock market. And so raising our last round was a bit of a challenge, because of probably the amount of money that we were raising, and also the phase we were in as a startup, and the whole sector, because it's completely new, and also the whole approach that we're taking with going direct to consumer in a B2C approach rather than large industrial scale B2B farms. And that didn't work out as planned. And then we had already built a relationship, or not, I wouldn't say a relationship, but we already had been in contact with Miele over a course of 1.5 years, every once in a while, just touching base. And we never really wanted a strategic investor from that side, because it would have blocked us from raising other capital from traditional VCs. But when that situation happened end of last year, we were in a difficult financial situation. It was the logical step to then reapproach Miele. And we also talked to other people in the space. but there was just the best alignment with Miele in terms of vision, our values, and the direction that we really wanted to head into. And they said they would only do this deal if we really, really want them to do it. You know, if they don't want to do it if it's like a hostile takeover. They would only do it if we stayed on board as the management team, if the team stayed on board, because they understood that the company could only work, and it could only work in collaboration with them if we don't lose the speed that we have. Because if we fully integrate into their corporate environment and structure, then everything slows down. But they want to keep us independent as sort of like this little speedboat, and the big tanker, the big heavy boat, which Miele is, can still do their thing. And we can support and leverage all of the structures that they've built over the past 120 years, but we can also be still flexible and agile as our little startup.
That's awesome, Max, and thanks again for sharing very openly, I guess, your journey in engaging and then leading to the acquisition. Out of interest, at the beginning, how did you actually navigate, I guess, the whole corporate world? I mean, you mentioned earlier that you used to work at the WWF, and you've been also exposed, to the corporate world. But I guess when it comes to the likes of Osram or Miele, I guess they're very different, beasts. How did you guys, I guess, navigate the whole, corporate infrastructure, identifying the right people to talk to, and any learnings that maybe you can share with fellow founders in that would be awesome.
I mean, what I've really learned over the past years is that it all boils down to communication and people skills, especially in a role like mine. And as long as I trust my gut feeling and I'm open and honest, people appreciate that. And I just try to stay that way and always act like that, act within purpose and stay true to myself without trying to bullshit anyone. And people respect that. And as long as you communicate clear and open, I think that's really what's been working for me or for us in the past years, I think.
That's awesome. So you're saying that by basically being transparent, you were able also to be referred to the right people internally, I guess, in the organization, and really figure out, mapping out all the different stakeholders and figure out who were the ones that you really had to, I guess, talk to in order to kind of advance also your conversation with them.
And you probably shouldn't, even if there's a way, you shouldn't try to, how do I say it? You shouldn't try to contact the CEO directly, for example, and overtake the
kind of conversation,
the corporate hierarchy. Exactly. So if people want to introduce you and want to give you an introduction to the higher level, then that's cool, but you shouldn't jump over them.
Yeah. So it was very organic, I guess.
Exactly. It was completely organic, the process. Yeah.
So you started, I guess, with open innovation and people were to deal with
exactly,
innovation.
Yeah.
And then from there, I guess you went into venturing and M&A eventually. Is that right?
Yeah, correct.
Fantastic. Great. And can you share maybe how, if any change, have occurred before we enter the biggest, I guess, change because of COVID and all of that? Did any change occur since you guys got acquired by them in terms of how you communicate, internally, but also with your stakeholders within the corporate? Is there anything that you can share with us in terms of just the aftermath, I guess, of the acquisition? How did you guys adjust?
Yeah, I mean, we really restructured the whole company. We got everyone together that was still on board after this whole process happened, and then basically did what we call it, we formed a company culture club, and just asked people what they've liked in the past, what they didn't like, how they would see the Agrilution 2.0 in the future, and then really reshaped the company together with the employees, built a new strategy, then pitched that strategy to Miele management. Got a bit of input here and there from them, but I would say 95% they accepted, and they understood why we wanted to do the things and how we wanted to approach it. And that process took about, almost 3 months. So we really slowed down and took time to reflect. So, I mean, now we're all forced to slow down a bit during this whole COVID situation. But we did that proactively, actually, starting last year of December already. Took a step back, slowed down, reflected on everything, restructured the company, re-strategized, and then hit the ground running in February again.
Wow. Okay. So effectively from how long did it last, the whole process from signing, I guess, the deal to actually hitting the ground running?
Well, the deal process was actually really, really fast. So it happened within a matter of 6 weeks.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Six to 8 weeks from first touching base to then all the legal, technical, financial due diligence process, getting the contracts lined up, and then on the 1st of December, everything was signed.
Oh, wow.
And then we took that step back, started reevaluating everything we were doing, and since basically beginning mid-February, we've been fully operational again.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's a proper, I guess, startup style.
Yeah.
Adapting fast and hit the ground running. Fantastic. So let me then jump into, I guess, less sexy, I guess, topic. However, it's on everybody's agenda now. And I think it would be really helpful if you could, in today's normal, if you could share with us, where do you see actually, what do you see as the biggest challenges in food tech at the moment, in terms of, like, I guess, further developing also your venture, even if it's within, a large corporate now, but in general, where do you see are the biggest challenges that the whole food tech industry is going to face?
I mean, what we've seen through this whole COVID situation, and I think that's super interesting, is that all of the excuses that we've heard the past 10, 20 years about how we cannot change things from one day to the other, and how we cannot stop our behavior or our normal systemic rhythm to balance out climate change or to fight climate change, that's not possible. But then when a pandemic hits us, from one day to the next, everything is possible. Everything stops and slows down. So I think that was super interesting to see. And that's an excuse that we hopefully won't hear that much anymore of in the future. So it will definitely have a positive outlook, positive influence on the climate crisis. But generally, I mean, what we've seen also is that our food system, the way it's built up, is not very resilient. What we're doing with Agrilution and also with vertical farming in general is trying to make the whole food system more resilient and less dependent on trade, less dependent on transporting it from a small farmer to then ship it a couple thousand miles before it ends up on your plate, and trying to cut all of the distribution chains. And I think it's a necessity. It's something that we'll see a lot more of in the future, and people are understand a lot more that, Dixon always used to say, and this was like 9 years ago, and I've recently mentioned this a lot in talks or interviews I've been asked to give, is a city really has about 2 to 5 days of food. And if the system shuts down, and we don't have food anymore, then shit really hits the fan. That's probably a way bigger problem than what we're seeing with a pandemic now. If we don't have food, people go crazy because they're hungry. So I think vertical farming, or just making the entire food system more resilient, will be something that's on a higher priority on the agenda, or will be a higher priority on the agenda in the coming months and years. So I think, I mean, it's bad to say that this is something good that's happened. It's certainly not good, but it's sort of shaken and woken a lot of people up, and that was necessary.
Very true. Yeah, very much. I agree with that. I think challenges, are there to be faced. And again, we don't really choose when a pandemic is going to hit us. So,
Mhm.
but I'm with you. I think, has really proven that there are no excuses, that we can use against, I guess, reversing climate change. As anything really, like a pandemic can hit us from, at any given point. So,
Yeah.
what I see is that on the one end, yeah, it will be more challenging maybe, these days to develop a food tech company or to build one from scratch, right? But on the other
Yeah.
hand, I think the needs of innovation and especially in technology in the agri-food space is, I guess, now is more evident than ever, right?
Yeah.
Because
Fully agree.
that the food system is not resilient enough, I guess, to face with a pandemic, but or I guess
Yeah.
any other big change in the market that may occur again in the future.
Yeah. So,
So
decentralization is something that hopefully will play a bigger role in the food space.
and what do you mean by decentralization? So
So, I mean, in our case, it's really about bringing the point of production to the point of consumption, and reducing the amount of miles, the amount of food miles, and therefore reducing food waste, but also impact on the climate.
yeah. So you're saying also, I guess, the number of I guess intermediaries that are in the food chain might
Yeah.
actually be cut off as we're trying to make the food system more resilient.
Yeah. So
Therefore,
urban or local food production will have to play a bigger role in the future.
yeah, very, very much. And so just to piggyback on that, what do you envision to be the next, I guess, big trends in food and food tech? And how do you envision the future of these industries to look like?
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously vertical farming, but we've talked about that for some time now. There are lots of other things that are now being sped up by this whole COVID situation, and one of them is plant-based food alternatives. So, I mean, just from the story, at least in the US and in the media in the US, about meat packing plants or huge slaughterhouses and factory farming in general. It's something that's probably more on the agenda and in the topic of the discussion in the media than ever. So I think that's a healthy conversation that started. People paying more attention to about how animals are treated and how the animal processing is happening, and people switching to meat alternatives like plant-based meat or dairy or whatever. I think that's only going to play a bigger role also in the future. That's a big trend that's not going away. Synthetic biology will play a huge role in terms of food production in the future. So that's another big trend. I think that's also going to take an uptick through this whole pandemic situation. Local urban food production. I think those three are probably the biggest ones that I'm seeing at the moment.
Yep. And let me just ask you a quick question again, back to, I guess, the evolution of vertical farming. A couple of weeks ago, we had a chat with one of the co-founders of Aero Farms, and we talked about how actually vertical farming can play a role also in, I guess, allowing consumers to create food that actually it's almost similar to medicine, meaning stressing the plants to effectively develop specific properties that can actually be therapeutic, or they're that kind of at the in between food and nutraceuticals, right?
Yeah.
Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that, or just share your view on how do you envision kind of the stitchers and the borders between food and medicine to kind of become in the future through
Yeah,
vertical
totally.
farming?
Yeah, I think it's probably my favorite topic, and it's something that we're working on here a lot. We refer to it as personalized nutrition, and basically trying to, on the one side, identify the compounds within plants that can be increased through environmental stressors by controlling climate, light, but also the watering. And on the other side, identifying how that all works within the human body, and how you can, by changing your diet, I mean, probably lifestyle, not probably, but lifestyle and the environment plays a huge role. But just looking at how the body functions and how you metabolize certain compounds and how your body takes them up, and linking that to the aspect of controlling the output within a closed environment vertical farm. Super interesting topic. And I think we'll see a lot more of that in the future. I don't know, I'm sorry, but I didn't watch the conversation that you had with Mark, but there are a couple of companies out there already that are, for example, producing vaccines in a vertical farming environment, like Fraunhofer Institute, for example. They produce usually vaccines are made in or reproduced in eggs, but it's way faster and more controlled and has less impact on the environment. Obviously, if you do it within plants, usually it's done in tobacco plants. So it's yeah, one thing that can be done is producing vaccines within plants. The Fraunhofer Institute does that here in Germany, but there is also a big company doing that in Texas, in the US. They've done it, for example, for the Ebola crisis that was hitting us a couple of years ago, and they produced vaccines. And it's certainly something that will play a role now if a vaccine is created or found for the whole COVID situation, Corona. But in essence, like, that's always a treatment, and I prefer to do something before it happens. So prevention is probably the better route to go. So eating healthy, living a healthy lifestyle, that's what everyone can do on a daily basis to just stay healthy and build a more resilient immune system. And obviously the way to do it is through a plant-based diet, and enhancing certain aspects of your diet through plant-based, what you refer to as nutraceuticals, or just plants with high amounts of secondary metabolites, or vitamins, minerals, antioxidants.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thanks, Max, for sharing that. I think is a topic of increased interest in the, I guess, global community. Although I guess they are in the early days of development, especially within vertical farming, a framework. I think is increasingly interesting as more consumers as well are, I think, looking for curing, I guess, themselves with food as opposed to medicine. So I think it's really interesting to see how other applications of also existing technology can enter also other industries. And I'm sure that, when anyone started, in this space, they probably didn't know that by stressing the plants, they could get more out of it, right? But once you do it, then you understand, I guess, you see the full picture of opportunities that, the technology can offer.
And the cool thing really is, for all the skeptics out there, is that you don't have to mess with the genetics. You can purely do it by changing the environmental parameters around the plant to really just get the full potential that's already in the seed, just unlock it.
Yeah, it's super interesting indeed. Sometimes people think about genetics and food as like almost the Frankenstein of food, but actually is a lot easier than sometimes we can even imagine. Fantastic. I guess we're running out of time, so I'm gonna close it up here and opening up to the questions from the participants. I've taken some notes as you were speaking. Some people were actually typing their questions. I'm just going to take the first one from Yuri, and if anyone else actually has questions, if you can either raise your hands or type them into the chat, that would be fantastic. So Yuri was asking, referring to the latest Moores documentary, do you believe vertical farming is really and truly sustainable, similarly to solar power generation?
So I'm sorry, I didn't see Michael Moore's last documentary or latest documentary, but I do believe vertical farming is definitely sustainable, but it depends how you do it. So it has to be linked to renewable energy source. Otherwise, obviously, if you produce energy in a coal power plant or a nuclear reactor, it doesn't make much sense. But if you do it through geothermal energy, wind, solar, wave, tidal, whatever, definitely the way to go. But the most important aspect to consider when you look at the sustainability or the overall ecological footprint of vertical farming in comparison to conventional farms is to have a look at the planetary boundaries. This is a super interesting concept of 9 impacting or being impacted the most. I think you lost me, right?
Lost you for a second, Max, but I think, yeah, you're back now. So
my headphones turned off, sorry.
That's okay.
So yeah, the most important aspects to look at in terms of the overall ecological footprint is definitely soil and the health of our soil on the planet. There just isn't enough soil left to produce food for the coming couple billion people. And the way we're treating our soil and depleting our soil has a very, very dramatic negative effect on biodiversity. And we're with the overuse of pesticides, over-fertilizing, agricultural runoff in general, and then also the overuse of fertilizers or compounds within fertilizers like phosphate or nitrate. I mean, these are things that are ending. We won't have enough of them in the next 20 to 40 years, or it'll be extremely expensive to source them because they're ending up on the ocean floor over time. So these aspects, next to obviously water and climate and stuff like that, are probably the biggest stressors that we're putting onto our global system. And they are heavily influenced by the way we do agriculture around the world. So vertical farming can play a role there because if you do it soil-less in a controlled environment and run it with renewable energies.
Fantastic, thanks, Max. And I also saw that Yuri thanked you in the chat, so I guess you addressed this question. Then we have another question from Karim, who's asking, what are the main challenges when building a direct-to-consumer model, whether it is a micro modular farm like yours or an indoor farming venture?
One huge challenge is getting the necessary capital, I would say, because in the end you're addressing end consumers. You're not going B2B or B2B2C, and that just makes it challenging because you have to find a way to get brand awareness or get known. People have to become aware that you exist and that you offer a solution to their problem or to their need. So it's something you have to either be very lucky to get a lot of viral attention, or you need to spend a ton of money in building that awareness. The other challenge I would say is that you need to be very, very precise in who you target. So you have to do very targeted marketing if you go B2C direct. And pricing is also extremely important to have the right pricing strategy.
Fantastic. Thanks, Max, for this. Is there any other question? I can't see any from there are any others. This would be the time to ask them. Let me just get back into the chat. If not, I have a very last question for you, Max. Oh, we have another one here. Still Karim asking what will be the factors that will reduce modular farms prices, if there is one, or what are the multiple factors that will help reducing modular farms pricing?
I mean, there are a couple of things you can do. One is that you don't try to reinvent the wheel. Try to look for parts that are used in large scale in other applications or other industries, maybe. The other thing that you can do is obviously produce at scale. So economies of scale always help, but it is challenging to reach that point. But that's certainly something that we're in a very lucky situation while working with Miele, is that we can use parts that they're using in other machines. And that's something that we haven't been able to do in the past. And that's why our first product was relatively expensive and then also targeted at a premium consumer niche. And that will hopefully change down the line now.
Fantastic. Thanks, Max. So very last question, I guess it would be just for you again, if there are other fellow entrepreneurs who have joined us today. If you could share one piece of advice with your younger self, what would that be? I guess trying to, summarize all the learnings, I guess, that you've gathered along the way. If there was one thing that you would share with your younger self.
One piece is difficult, but in general, I think time. I always thought that I'm running out of time and there is not enough time and someone else will copy us or will be faster or whatever. But in essence, time is the most important thing that you have in life, and be very, very wary of that and what you do with it. And yes, when you're building a startup, you're going to invest a lot of time into building that company. But there are other things in life that are important next to work, and balancing your health in order to be more, to give out more performance and be more effective and efficient. So probably time management, being very, very cautious with how you spend your time, what you spend time on. And the other thing is working as effective and as efficient as possible.
Fantastic, Max. Thank you very much for joining us for such a fantastic interview and for sharing very openly your story and the story that led you to build the business and all these great pieces of advice that you've shared with us all. We wish you and Agrilution team the very best over the coming months. And we watched with interest actually how you're going to further develop the company and help, I guess, bring more vertical farming units within more households. So we're really excited. Thanks a lot again for joining us. And for everyone who's with us, we're going to record this session and then share it over YouTube in the next couple of days. So stay tuned and join me in thanking again, Max, for your time. And we wish you all a great day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, Max.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Happy.